mentioned this morning in personal holiness. And so we need to make certain that the gospel does not become an excuse for avoiding preaching about sin. And, well, you can take it from there.
Yeah, I would add one thing that I'm going to get on this a little bit on Friday. I think we have to identify false teachers. And I think we have to identify false doctrine. What we're going to see in Galatians, if you want to get ready for Friday night's message, read the first 12 verses of chapter 5. Paul's language is shocking as he confronts false doctrine and false teachers. It's some of the most stunning language that he ever put to a pen. I don't think there's a willingness to do that in this age of tolerance and compromise. And Paul says, look, I ceased not for the space of 3 years to warn you night and day with tears. And I knew it was going to happen. After my departure, evil, perverse men of your own selves would rise up among you, and from the outside wolves would come in, not sparing the flock. If you do not, this is two sides of this thing. The pastor's purpose we talked about this morning. Friday we're going to talk about the pastor's protection. Protecting people is critical, and that's what Paul was doing. He was concerned about their sanctification, but he ends that emphasis in chapter 5 before he gets to walking in the Spirit, the positive side, with this amazing blast against all false doctrine and false teachers. People can easily be bewitched. And that's why I said maybe most churches are bewitched to some degree. And it's often because we will not be straightforward. I'm not talking about, naming names all the time. I'm just saying giving them criteria to be discerning about error and how devastating it is.
And Dr. MacArthur, you have been faithful to call out threats that you see to the church and to the gospel over the years, and we're all grateful for that. You're all students of church history, and the church has been preserved and protected by men who've been willing to take on those threats to those things most essential to the Christian faith. Today, what do you see as looming threats? What else is out there without spoiling Friday night? What do you see now that's a threat to the church from the outside?
You do recognize you asked me to preach on that tonight.
Right.
I'm ready to hear it.
No, I just don't want to preach my sermon before we get there, but okay. I'm happy for Dr. MacArthur to preach it.
Well, he's made me give mine away for Friday, so. Yeah, look, I can give a simple answer to cover all of it. Anything raised up against the knowledge of God, anything untrue, that's a threat.
I'll name two that I see right now. Gender issues, any number of them, and addiction to signs, wonders, dreams, and visions.
Without spoiling Dr. Mohler's message, Dr. Duncan, any thoughts?
I see we're preaching into a generation, even in the churches, people they're at church, they're in church, they're profoundly influenced by the culture and the way the world evaluates things. And they are coming with a set of moral arguments against historic Christianity and biblical truth that many pastors are tempted to try to accommodate rather than to confront as a false way of understanding and an actual affront to biblical truth. And so we are going to have, in gender, sexuality, marriage, et cetera, as Mark just mentioned, is one of the areas where that happens. It's not the only one. You have people bringing moral arguments against the God of the Old Testament with them to church. And so one of the things we want to do is we want to be able to respond to that in a compelling but faithful way, affirming the truthfulness of the faith once delivered. And that means you have to know how they think and what has attracted them to that manner of thinking. And then you have to plant your feet in the scriptures and refuse to budge from them, refuse to accommodate your teaching to what's popular right now. And I think I feel that right now more than at any time in my life. And I'm talking about in our circles, and this is Bible-believing pastor world here right now. And I'm talking about the kind of people that show up in our circles. I feel that they are more under the influence of, bewitching of, the way the world thinks about a series of these things than in any time that I can remember. Part of it probably is that evangelicalism has suffered from a lack of Bible teaching for the last 40 years. John hinted at it today. But really, with the beginning of the church growth movement, the idea was Bible exposition will bore people. And so if you really want to reach people and church the unchurched, you need to ditch Bible exposition and do, sort of superficial, practical talks. And as a consequence, we've ended up de-churching the church so that people haven't heard Bible exposition in a lot of places. And into that vacuum, something else has come, and it's not Bible. And so you now have that, that's now placed on your doorstep, and you're speaking into that world, and you need to be ready to do that.
One thing strikes me in this. I'm convinced that to be male is to have ADHD. And perhaps to be human in one sense, but especially to be male. And it's sort of like you're going, this is the most profound truth. I'm talking about human dignity. I'm talking about the gospel. I'm talking about the hypostatic union. Oh, there's a giraffe video. Where does that come from? And yet that's what I'm seeing writ large in some of our circles right now. I thought, amazingly enough, that 10 years ago, something remarkable was happening, because what I was hearing was just about every preacher at least say, that what he was determined to do was biblical exposition. Almost everyone was saying, I'm committed to expository preaching. But then the next thing you know is, I'm committed to expository preaching. I'm committed to verse-by-verse exposition. Oh, there's a giraffe video. The signs and wonders thing is just amazing. How many people, some of the same people who were speaking about the necessity of a word-centered ministry, they are now being attracted by what detracts from the ministry of the word, at the very least, what distracts from the ministry of the word. And I am shocked that it has happened so quickly.
I think one of the things, picking up on what a number of you said, particularly like something you were saying, is I certainly feel, and I wonder if you brothers feel this too, that I'm tooled up against nominal Christianity. If I want to give you a knock on 9 marks, I think it's kind of written in my mind in the 90s, and my big concern is nominal Christianity. And it is a big concern. But I feel like the world we're living in right now, nominal Christianity is a problem, but it's being replaced rapidly with a hostile world to Christianity. Now, I know the world theology has always been hostile, I got that. But I mean, like America in particular, and the communities that we're in, there was a respect 15 and 20 years ago when I would go into a hospital that the nurses would give me as a Christian pastor. That is just gone now. Now maybe that's just the DC area, maybe it's different, where you are. But I think that there is theologically, there's no change that's happening. We know that ultimately. But in our experience, what do you think about this? That 20 years ago, a lot of us were necessarily more exercised about nominal Christianity, and that has just been replaced in America with open hostility, the rise of the nuns that you talk about, the people with no religious opinions.
No, I think that's true. I think we're living in a culture that, if it had its way, sort of at the elite level, would make Christianity a crime. That's how far it's come. I think all these laws that are being passed all over the place are really, in the end game for all of this is to make Christianity, biblical Christianity, illegal. That's what all the free speech stuff is all about. You can't say that in my presence, that's offensive. I think there is a wholesale move in that direction. And of course, if that is going on in a time when the church is trying to be pragmatic, you've got an absolute disaster on your hands.
Yeah, and the way they will do that is more sophisticated than making Christianity illegal. They will make any public consequence of Christianity illegal.
Baking a cake.
Right. So what you do, as New York Times columnist Frank Bruni said, in the privacy of your home, your heart, or your pews, then that's your business. But you take it outside, and you're out of bounds. And so I think that's coming. And I think that's where we have to make very clear that Christianity is a public truth claim. We're not saying that Christianity is true for us. We're not saying that Jesus Christ is Lord for us. We're saying that Jesus Christ is Lord and that the gospel is true. That's what will get us in trouble.
You know, Al, your book, and I recommend all of you guys read this book on conviction, leadership by conviction. I mean, that is the issue in leadership, conviction. And what I see missing is courage, just plain old courage. The courage to stand up and speak the truth in the face of all the trends going the other way. That speak the truth in love, but where is the courage? Be a man, act like men. Have some courage.
Mentoring is, you mentioned it, the Apostle Paul, he had no earthly mentor. It's the burden of all of you men to mentor younger men, especially in ministry. Talk to these pastors about how they can find a mentor. How can they be discipled? How can the discipler be discipled?
Let me just jump in and say, I understand that if you're a pastor, everybody expects that of you, and you don't necessarily have somebody in your little world all the time to do that. I was with Steve Lawson last night, really interesting. He has a study with no windows, but he has 4 pictures hanging on the wall that are framed, and they're huge. One is William Tyndale, who basically was hanged by a chain and then burned to death, and then gunpowder blew his body to bits for the faithfulness of preaching the word and printing the word when it was against the law. He has Calvin looking over one other part of his desk. He has John Rogers, the first Marian martyr, in his Bible to remind him of the first man who was killed for the cause of the gospel under Bloody Mary. And he mentioned somebody else, but he said, when I walk into my study, I just have these looming figures hanging over my head. We have the wrong heroes in this culture, for sure. For sure. You would do well to familiarize yourself with those great men who gave their lives for the cause of the gospel. It'll humiliate you, hopefully to a point where you're broken and the Lord can rebuild you into a man of character and courage. You don't need a buddy mentor. You just need to start familiarizing yourself with the great heroes of the faith through history.
Though dead, they speak.
Yeah.
Dr. Dever, your thoughts on training men, on investing in men, having those kind of relationships as a pastor?
You mean who I look for to train me or who I look to train?
Let's talk about how you think about mentoring.
For me to find a mentor or for me to be a mentor?
Whichever you'd answer, I'd be happy with at this point.
Well, you start by finding a dude who has on some Dr. Seuss socks. I just can't get that out of my mind, Austin. I'm sorry. It's just...
We've covered the socks already.
Wow. I think you look for the hungry. You know, you look for the people who want to grow, who find profit in your ministry. I'm a pastor of a church in Washington, D.C., and most evangelical Christians in Washington, D.C. are not members of my church. I'm not the pastor of every Christian in Washington. I'm the pastor of just the people in this church. And everybody doesn't have to benefit from my ministry. Just these people are benefiting from my ministry. And it's the same way when we disciple. It's just because, I'm a Christian, that doesn't mean every Christian has to be able to learn from me or I have to be able to teach them. I just trust the Lord will provide enough for what I can do to try to pour myself into them. So I'm just looking for those people who are available. So very practically for me, when I'm standing at the door at the back on Sundays after preaching, I will probably say to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people, hey, call me up sometime. We'll have coffee or get lunch. Almost never does anybody do that. You know, maybe 1 out of every 2 weeks worth of people. And that's going to be the subgroup out of which we'll develop some continuing ongoing relationships. So I look for those people who are willing to, when I take a little bit of initiative, they're willing to pick that up. That's going to be a self-selecting group. So I think that's one thing that's helpful.
Well, you men are mentors to so many of us, and we're grateful for that. Let's conclude with a quick lightning round / acknowledgement. What have you learned about the church from someone on this panel?
Well, I'll start with the obvious. John's preaching the word expositionally for 50 years is a huge encouragement to me. Because my congregation will probably do something sweet. I don't know, but I got 25 years coming up next year. And I'm just thinking, like, that's half of what John has done. Like, I could do that again, and it would be. Now, the Lord calls people to different times and different places, and that's fine. But it's really, brother, it's just a huge encouragement. Yeah. And I've had the privilege sitting here a number of Sunday mornings hearing you preach just your regular expositions, and it is such an encouragement to watch your confidence, your joy, and people being fed and growing from it. Yeah. So that's an obvious thing to say that I'm sure we would all agree with. So thank you, brother.
Well said.
That is the necessary thing to say. And so I'll say what I said to someone just an hour ago. Before I ever knew I would ever know John MacArthur, he was teaching me how to preach the scriptures when I was a skinny 16-year-old across a continent. And I heard him by cassette tape. And so, I mean, that's the one necessary thing that has to be said. The other necessary thing I want to say is of the friend to my right and the friend to my left, that we've been friends in the gospel for each other so close for so long, I no longer know who I am without either of them. And I pray that for you in ministry. You need friends with whom you can be, by God's grace, faithful together over time, such that I really can't tell you exactly what either one of them has contributed to my life, other than so much I can't catalog. Your thinking begins to be so mutually dependent, and your encouragement for each other and from one another is so pervasive that I wouldn't do anything important in life, nor would I think through any big question without talking to Mark and Lake. Wouldn't happen. And so, what exactly they contributed, you be the judge. But I will say when I talk to young pastors and I say, please, please, please develop friendships that you intend to maintain through life, in ministry, in the gospel, in the preaching of the word, in the service to Christ. I desperately make that plea. You need someone who will not be offended to hear from you at 3 in the morning. And you need someone who will drop everything and come to you if you need it. And you need someone with whom you don't have to begin a conversation. Every conversation's picking up on just where you left off last time.
Quick example, I was early in ministry at CHBC. I had a really kind of weird job, ministry opportunity. I called Al about it. I think I was a little bit excited and really uncertain what to do. Al lovingly, quickly thumped it. And he was right.
That's great.
You want friends like that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I'm around a lot of Presbyterian students that are excited about a theoretical high ecclesiology. And I always say, if you want to see a high ecclesiology, go to Capitol Hill Baptist Church. That's where you'll see high ecclesiology. And so it's just wonderful to see a brother that has tried to work out the Bible's truth into the way a congregation lives together. And knowing Mark and Al, it's like knowing Greatheart, an evangelist from Pilgrim's Progress. Side by side. Good. Yeah. Dr. MacArthur, the final word is yours.
Yeah, everything these guys have said that I've heard, everything they've written that I've read, every time I'm with them, my life is enriched. That's not quantifiable. that doesn't come in measurable bits or gigabytes or any other thing. I am what I am because of these men and the other people that God has put in my life. And I mean, I'm as much a Presbyterian as I'll ever be because of Ligon Duncan and Sinclair Ferguson and R.C. Sproul. And
But that's just because they're so nice. It's not their theology.
no,
I mean, it's just because they're so nice. It's their godliness.
yes, yeah.
Right, okay.
Right, no, don't worry, Mark, I'm
Okay.
not going there.
All right.
I'm not going there. But I'm only trying to make a point that we are, I don't know, like Al said, we are what we are because of these relationships. And they're not quantifiable. There's something, my heart jumps when I know you're going to be here. You know, when I'm going to be with you. To preach in Capitol, several times that I've preached there have been highlights of my life because it tells me that you trust me with your people, and I know how you feel about your church. You don't put it in the hands of anybody, just anybody. And I'm honored by that, even if I have to sit in the upper room for 2 hours after Sunday night. We'll talk about that later. That's an inside story. But it's a wonderful, delightful thing to do because it's part of how he trains his men. Yeah, every time I'm with these men, I am enriched. It's just another deposit by the Spirit of God through them in my life. Christ comes to me through you.
We're so grateful for you men, for your ministries, for your influence. On behalf of all of these guys in attendance, thank you for spending this hour with us, talking through these things. I'll let you men go. I don't know who got it worse, the Presbyterians or my socks, but I'll let you think about that. If you'll return to this room at 2 o'clock, at 2 o'clock the next session begins. We'll meet back here 2 o'clock with H.B. Charles. Thank you.